Hey everybody, what's going on? It is James with Crypto Common Sense, aka Three Peaks Trading, and I wanted to sit down this Sunday evening and shoot a video walking through a concept that if you will understand this and apply it to your financial life, it can open many doors and windows for you. And this concept is the concept of R. And the concept of R is something that I really didn't understand up until I became a professional trader. I was doing it and using this concept unknowingly when I was self-employed and, had multiple businesses, but I didn't really understand. I was kind of following this pattern. So I want to walk through some pretty cool stuff. Like I said, this is a video that can be applied to many different areas, whether it's investments, whether it's trading, whether it's business, whether it's, games of chance, whatever it is. So I'm going to start this story going back almost 20 years. Well, even further. Long story short, I never wanted to work for anybody else. I knew from a very early age that I wanted to be self-employed and I wanted to have a lot of money. And that came from a place of not having very much money growing up. And so, especially when I was a teenager, some things happened in life that left me on my own just after my 17th birthday. And I was very, very economically challenged. And not economically challenged like teenagers today who are upset because they don't have the latest iPhone, but I was economically challenged like I didn't have food to eat. I didn't always have running water. I didn't always have utilities. I was in some really bad spots. Now, some of those spots, self-admittingly, I put myself in through bad decisions and bad choices. Some of them were just the cards I was dealt. And so I was always looking for a way to become self-employed. And most of the endeavors that I went down were like, I would buy stuff off infomercials. Starting literally as a teenager, I would buy infomercial stuff and try to do self-employment. And eventually, nothing worked. I started a drop shipping company, for example, in 2003, and I started working on online marketing in 2003, kind of on the side. But then in early 2006, I was selling cars for a living. I was actually doing pretty well. My best month up to that point selling cars was about $12,000. And that was in, Southeast Missouri, where my total overhead every month was only about $2,500 to $3,000 a month is all it took, pay my trailer payment. Cause I lived in a single wide trailer that I bought brand new, and my pad rent, my car payment, all that stuff. Just called about $3,000 a month. So I was doing pretty well, but I hated my job. I actually hated selling cars. And so I was still trying to do self-employment stuff. And then I went to get together with some friends, and they were playing this game called No Limit Hold'em Poker. Now, I had never played this game. I wasn't somebody that watched a lot of television. I was more into computers and video games than I was TV at that point. And so I never seen like World Series of Poker or any of these things, but I thought this game was pretty neat. And so then my friend Corey was like, you can actually play this online if you want. You can go home and play for 10 cents, annies and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's really cool, So I went home and I kind of tinkered with it a little bit. And I very quickly realized that A, I was good at it naturally without knowing much about poker. And B, it spoke to me because poker, at least back then specifically, was about patterns, right? Very heavily pattern dominated. If you understood patterns, other players playing patterns, betting patterns, if you understood the cards and the likelihood and probabilities, poker was a game not of luck, like I had always believed, but of skill. And so I started playing poker a lot, like 16 to 18 hours a day, a lot on my days off. And within about 3 or 4 weeks, I quit my job, much to the opposition of my wife, and decided that I was going to become a professional poker player. Now, here I am in my single wide trailer in Southeast Missouri, deciding that I'm an online poker player. I became a tournament player, and I started playing these tournaments that would cost like 10, 20 bucks to buy into. And then if you won these tournaments, you could win like 3 or 4, $500, sometimes even more. So I'm going to show you some of this. I'm going to explain how this concept applies to trading, I promise, and life. So here's a screenshot. The screenshot was taken in July of 2006. This was probably about 2 to 3 months after I learned, like literally played poker for the first time ever, like no limit hold'em. I was ranked 27th on the entire site. So I wanted to give you an idea, a realistic idea of what this quote unquote professional poker player stuff actually looked like. We're not talking about the guys on TV making millions and millions of dollars. We're talking about clearing, several $1,000s a month. So this is what I would do. I would buy into these really cheap tournaments. Like you can see here, I only had $280 on my account at the time. I was buying into this tournament that cost $11. There was like a $10 that I think $10 went into the prize pool is how it worked. And then $1 was like the fee that the site made or whatever it was. But anyway, it cost me $11. But you can see that 77 people joined and first prize, in this case, me, was $231. Now I want you to think about this a second. Think about this in terms of R. I was risking 11 to make a potential 231. That is a 21 potential R. Now keep that in mind, 21R. So let's go over to our spreadsheet for a second and say that I'm trading a 21R system and I'm risking, I think it was $11 in that case. How often do I have to win first place in that tournament to be a successful poker player? So it looks like about 5% of the time. So I needed to win 1 out of 20 tournaments to make that work. But a lot of times the prize pools were bigger than that. That particular tournament was a small tournament where not very many people entered. And so the prize was really bad. So here's a better example. This here tournament was a $27 tournament. You can see I had a little bit more money at this point on the account, which I was withdrawing to pay bills because I didn't have a job at the time. And my wife had just given birth to my daughter a few months earlier. So $27, okay? And the first prize on this tournament was $2,500. So what I was trying to make was 92.5 R. Now I failed and I came in second instead. So I made $1,600. But $1,600 divided by my entry fee of $27, I made 59.25 R. So 59.25, I was risking, I think we said $27. How often did I have to win that prize to make that system work? And the answer, I only had to get second place on those types of tournaments 2% of the time. That's 1 out of 50 tournaments that I had to take second place in at that prize pool. So a lot of these tournaments, I went anywhere from, $300 to $500 on the $10 tournaments. And then on the $25 tournaments, I went anywhere from, $500 to $5,000 typically. So my R was typically somewhere between, say, 25 and 100 R. So I need to win 2 to 5% of the tournaments, essentially, to be a really successful tournament player. And I did that, right? I didn't know I was doing it. I wasn't doing it in my head as terms of R, but I did realize in my head, like, hey, I can enter these tournaments every single day because I've only got to win 1 or 2 to cover all of my entry fees, and then everything else is profit. And yet here's the kicker. I didn't do exceptionally well as a poker player, even though I was ranked 27th on the site, even though I was winning these tournaments way more often than I needed to. But the reason that I wasn't a 6-figure poker player came down to this. In between tournaments, I would go play cash games. And in these cash games, I would often buy in for like $200. And, I might be playing like $1, $2 antes. And so the average pot might be, a couple $100. But here's the problem. I don't know that I ever had a great, I can't remember, but I don't remember ever having any great cash nights. Typically what would happen in my cash games is I would win a few hundred, maybe even a few $1,000s. But before I quit playing, I would have lost all of that and typically bought back in, put another 200 down, lost it, bought back in, put another 200 down, and did that several times. And so overall, what would happen is these cash gains would suck all the profits or most of the profits back out of my poker winnings. And I want you to think about this in terms of trading. This would be the equivalent of you've taken a really great trade, let's say on Bitcoin. Maybe you were risking $1,000 and Bitcoin went way up and you made 10,000. So you're up $10,000. And you are a trader who uses stop losses, but now you're up 10,000. And so you take a new trade and you're like, okay, I got $1,000 stop loss. And it hits it, but you're like, well, I'm up 10 grand, so no big deal. So you move it. Now you're down 2 grand. Oh, I'm still up 8 grand, no big deal. So you keep moving it. And eventually what happens is you lose all those profits that you made. Now, this is a mental flaw that human beings have. And it's a flaw that I have, right? I had it in poker. I didn't recognize it. I was still very, very young. I was in my early 20s at the time. Well, almost mid 20s, I guess, by then. And then it's a flaw that I had in 2018. So in 2017, I started with a little over $13,000. I turned that into, double by August of that year. I did the quote unquote smart thing. I took half off the table, essentially making, everything left was house money, pure profits. I turned that into multiple six figures by the end of 2017. Everything was looking good. I remember being in my Discord like, hey, I only need to 4x my money and I'll hit $1 million playing with nothing but house money. And then 2018 happened and I was using stop losses like I was supposed to, but I did exactly what I just described. I started moving the stops because I thought to myself, how low can these possibly go? I'm buying the dip. But when you buy a dip in a bear market, those 30% dips go down 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 95%, right? And so I ended up losing nearly every dime that I made. In fact, after taxes, I lost money, because I had massive capital gains in 2017 that I owed large taxes on. And then all of my losses happened in 2018. And I wasn't declared as a quote unquote day trader. And so I thought I was going to be able to claim all those on my taxes, but I couldn't. They capped me at $3,000 in losses. And so I was actually deep in the red come 2019 when you figure in taxes. So I had to start over. And it's because I wasn't really sticking to the concept of R. And if we think about this concept of R in business, I'm going to give you an example in business. I had a friend who migrated to the United States and became a citizen. He was originally from India. And when I met him in 2013, he was, he had just left a job not too long before that, making like $7 an hour selling pretzels at our local mall. And we went and we had lunch. We met through Facebook, actually. And we went and we had lunch and we were hanging out. And he was a really interesting guy. And I'd had a lot of success in business already. And he was like, trying to get just a little advice and whatnot. And his business model was different from mine. So there wasn't a lot I could tell him, but I just enjoyed chatting with him. He had some cool ideas. And then he says to me, James, my goal for next year is to make $1 million. Now you gotta understand, this guy wasn't really making hardly anything yet. And so for most people to say that, I would just kind of roll my eyes and be like, whatever, like, oh, here we go. But there was something about this guy specifically and the way that he was approaching things and the way he was thinking about things that I thought to myself, you know what, this guy might actually do this. Like he might actually make $1 million next year. I don't know how he's going to do it, but I think he might be able to do this. And I'll tell you what that guy did. He started a business where he was selling t-shirts. And unlike most people who dabbled with t-shirts, he didn't launch 1 or 2 shirts a week. No, he launched 20 shirts a day. And I mean literally 20. That was the number. Every single day, he would launch 20 new shirts. And he told me, James, I understand that when I launch these shirts, 95% of them are not going to make any money to speak of. I think the number was like 15 or 16 are going to lose money after advertising. Like 3 or 4 might break even after advertising. He said, but there's going to be like 1 shirt out of every 20 that just goes nuts. So think about that. What he was doing was really a 5% win rate, like 1 out of 20. But he knew that when that shirt hit and when that 1 shirt revealed itself to be a winner, he might make 50 or 100 times what he had spent advertising in all 20 shirts combined. So essentially, as you think about it, he was trading a 50R system. And by the way, just so you guys know, he did go on to make over $1 million. In fact, over 2 years, he sold over $10 million worth of shirts. That is the concept of R. When I look at my businesses, for example, I used to create software. That was my main business, and I could not code myself. So what I would do is I would hire freelancers to build software. I would wireframe it. I would mock it up. So essentially I would use like Photoshop type tools to basically build what the software should look like in pictures. And then I would hire developers from freelance sites, give them those pictures, and they would write the code that actually made that come to life. And then I would market that software through affiliate connections and through organic traffic, etc. And so when I did that, I knew that, sometimes the software that I created would not make money. Sometimes I would spend, $5,000 or even $10,000 on a piece of software, and it just wouldn't hit well with the market. And so I would end up losing money on that software. So my risk was essentially, let's just say 10 grand. Okay. But I also knew that when a software did well, that I would make back 50 to 100 times what I spent building that software. So what was I doing? I was trading a 50R system. Okay. So for example, I think probably the biggest R ever, there was a software that I spent $900 making. It was actually the first software that I ever created. I spent $900 on it. My budget was $1,000, and I think the guy charged me like $650, and then I just gave him a tip because I was like, dude, this is amazing. So the software cost me $900. I launch it. It makes like $50,000-$60,000 in a couple of days, but most of that gets paid out to affiliates, which is risk-free because they only get paid if they make money first. Affiliates and all this kind of stuff. So I think on the actual launch itself, that software ended up making like maybe 10 grand, 20 grand, something like that in my pocket, like specific net profit. Okay. So we'll say 10R up front. But here's the thing. I built this list of almost 3,000 people who bought this software from me over the course of about 7 days. And then I did a webinar with those people where I sold them a related product that would help solve the problem they were having. In that webinar, I made $37,000 commission on in 2 hours. Okay. I don't remember the exact numbers when the webinar is all said and done, but I made 37 grand on the webinar in 2 hours. I know that number because it was the most money in the smallest amount of time I'd ever made in my life. In fact, it was more money in 2 hours than at one point I made all year as a district manager for a small finance company. And I was just, blown away by that. So think about that now. Now, if I made $37,000 on that, and we'll say $10,000 on the launch, that's $47,000 on a $900 risk. That, my friends, was about a 52R. And that's the way I approach software in all business things. So for example, in 2022, I had quite a bit of capital. I didn't like the markets at the time, even though I did actually buy some Bitcoin in November of 2022. But in October of 2022, I actually decided to start an excavation company with my oldest stepson, who had about 15 or 16 years experience at the time, and that because he's only 8 years younger than I am. And so I went out and I bought a machine, a $57,000 machine. I bought a $7,000 trailer to haul it, and I bought like a $3,000 old F-250 truck to pull it, because the only thing the trucks are used for is literally to pull the machine. Right, so about $70,000 investment, but it wasn't really a $70,000 risk because that machine and that trailer and that truck all have value. Right. So the depreciation was the real risk of that business. And the other thing is, if I wasn't happy with the business, say a year into it or 2 years into it, I could obviously sell all that. So again, just depreciation. So let's say, for example, that over the first 24 months, let's say I was given a 2-year time frame, 24 months. And I thought, well, the truck's not going to depreciate. It is what it is. Trailer's going to depreciate by probably, half, probably not, but we'll say half. So it's $3,500 risk. And the machine's going to depreciate by, let's say, 20 grand. All right. So my real risk on that business was $23,500. But then when I think about it, what's the upside of that business? Well, if the business does well, it should make $200,000 a year, net. Half of that would be mine. So that's $100,000 a year net. And just say 20 years, right? Or even say 10 years. That's $1 million upside on $23,000 risk. What's the R on that? And again, these are just ballpark numbers, obviously, right? That would be like 42R. So my point with this is I can take multiple stabs at stuff as long as I approach it with a set risk amount. And this is exactly how trading works, guys. When we go into a trade, it's really like starting a business. It's like the trade, the stop loss is our startup capital, or it's like playing poker and buying into a tournament. The most you can lose is what you paid to enter that tournament. Or for example, in trading, if you buy a call option or if you buy a put option, the most you can lose is the premium for those options. Or if you enter a trade and you put a stop loss, the most you can lose, barring really weird events, is going to be whatever you risk on your stop loss. Or if you enter into an investment, the most you can lose is, whatever you paid for the stock. So if I buy QQQ at $500 a share with no stop loss, worst case, it goes to zero and I lose $500. Now, realistically, I don't know how that could even happen because a QQQ is obviously, a basket of stocks or tracks a basket of stocks. But my point being, if you approach life like this, it's actually really easy to multiply your capital. If you don't approach life like this and you do what I did back in my early 20s when I was playing poker and you just throw money against the wall, it's very easy to go bankrupt. Had I just kept those cash games out of the picture because there was no reason to play them, they essentially had unlimited risk because every time I lost my money, I could just buy back in. If I had just stuck to playing tournaments, I would have been a six-figure poker player in my early 20s. Now, in October of 2006, the Bush administration pushed through a bunch of laws that made online gambling illegal, including online poker for money. So it wouldn't have mattered. I still wouldn't have been able to pursue a poker career because I wasn't going to move my family to Las Vegas or anything. But, it would have been nice to have an extra $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to get that leg up in life in my early 20s because I had to work and claw and bite my way for every inch. When I was starting out, I didn't have a leg up like some people have. And I'm not unhappy about that. I think it made me who I am. And I think it made me a go-getter. But at the same time, I was already a go-getter by that point. So having an extra 30 or 40 grand would have been pretty sweet. So anyway, I hope you guys get a lot out of this video. I know it's very different from a lot of content that I usually do. It's very different from other people's content. But I'm a very different sort of guy. I have done a lot of really interesting things. I've always marched to the beat of my own drummer. And that includes, being in sales jobs. That includes, walking out on jobs for no reason other than I was miffed that day. That includes, dropping out of high school while being a top ranked student in my class. I just kind of go with my moods, right? And so I wanted to share this with you. It's a really big thing. You can take it and apply it to business. You can apply it to trading. You can apply it to, like I said, games of chance or games of skill. There's all sorts of things you can do with this. And once you understand it, it essentially unlocks the kingdom. All right, this is James with Crypto Common Sense, aka 3 Peaks Trading, reminding you to please trade safe. And obviously, if you haven't already, be sure and check the description. I'm going to leave a link down there where you can actually join my private community for trading. And I think if it grows large enough, I'd really like to share some business stuff too, because the reality is I don't talk about it a lot, but I've obviously made 7 figures as a business owner. And so I have some insights there that some folks may find valuable. All right, stop now, subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. Any comments? I'd love to see them.